I've chosen to do my presentation on Chronicle of a Death Foretold. The story is rich with context. It allows for several different forms of interpretation and analysis. One of the most interesting things I found was how the story relates to the gender studies school of literary criticism. As touched upon in my PowerPoint, gender roles are deeply ingrained within Hispanic culture. These roles are heavily stressed throughout the novel and play an integral role in the story itself. The typical patriarchal archetype is naturally represented in the novel, and it can be easily analyzed from the gender studies perspective. As mentioned, masculinity and femininity respectively are highly valued within the Hispanic culture. This fact is readily exemplified within the novel. The men are often depicted as powerful and commanding, while women are often seen as submissive and domestically inclined. Though the view of women as other is prevalent, there are a few exceptions within the story where women are not depicted as entirely weak or powerless. This is a key element, and it's exemplified early in the novel when we see Santiago Nasser engaged with the cook and her daughter in his mother's kitchen. When the daughter comes to take an empty mug from him, Santiago grabs her by the wrist and says something to the effect of, "The time has come for you to be tamed." In response to this, her mother wields a bloody knife and warns him to let go of her daughter. In a very matter-of-fact manner, she tells Santiago that he won't have a drink of that water as long as she's alive. In this particular scene, the frailty of the daughter is contrasted by her mother's assertive protectiveness, and in the same vein, Santiago's supposed dominance is very clearly undermined. This balance of power between men and women is of great import in the story, Chronicle of a Death Foretold. The general supposition of men as dominant and in ultimate control is readily exemplified in the story. However, the underlying power of influence exerted by women is also a central component. While it's implied throughout the story that Santiago Nasser was in fact not guilty of the allegations levied against him, it was the power of Angela Vicari's accusation that ultimately brings about his demise. This being said, the entire premise of the story is indicative of the perceived gender roles within the culture. Upon being returned to her family, Angela Vicario names Santiago as her lover. Santiago is consequently murdered by the Vicario brothers based on this allegation that he defiled their sister and took her honor. The fact that her brothers didn't question their sister's accusation in the slightest, or refrain from action to briefly investigate its merit, speaks to the inherent trust they placed in her. It also speaks to the manner with which men generally regard women in society. That's to say, men generally regard women as being less capable. In this particular case, the brothers underestimate the capability of their sister as it pertains to her calculated manipulation of their masculine egos. Readers can see that the Chronicle of Santiago Nasser's death not only accounts for precursory events, but also for the societal attitudes that contributed to the murder. While Angela's motivation for implicating Santiago is never divulged, the influential forces that allowed for his murder to come about are woven throughout the story. Masculine and ego-driven desire to preserve this perception of honor, combined with a view of women as weak and less capable, are the primary factors that motivate the murder. The individuals who are caught up in these conceptions, the townspeople, the narrator, and even the protagonists and antagonists, are merely the agents of consequence as it pertains to the perception of gender roles within their society. The obvious question that remains unanswered in the novel is, who was Angela's real lover, and why did she accuse Santiago? There are several brief occurrences in the story where we see Santiago and Angela in juxtaposition. One of these moments is when the narrator recounts an instance where Santiago commented that Angela, whom he termed a ninny, was set to be hooked, an expression that he used to convey her apparent desperation to be married. While almost no clues are given as to who might have actually been her lover, one might presume that she chose to implicate Santiago due to unrequited feelings she may have had for him. Perhaps the aspect that I found most interesting about approaching this analysis from the gender studies school of criticism is that the story of a fictional and isolated incident really speaks to very real and pervasive attitudes regarding gender roles within society that are still very much a factor in our own society today. I feel that critical analyses like these really allow us to see our own perceptual faults and our own prejudices that we might otherwise easily ignore or write off.